They told you this place was a sanctuary, a refuge for those left behind, forgotten by fortune and forsaken by family. But what if I told you it was a tomb disguised as a home? That behind those polished oak doors and warm cream facades, something far darker was brewing? In the spring of 1869, as demolition crews tore down the Blessed Widow's Christian home in Manhattan, they found not peace, but horror. 67 coffins hidden behind a false wall, each containing a vanished widow, draped in riches no longer hers to claim. None had died within those walls, according to official records. They had simply disappeared. The charity touted as a haven had been a calculated trap, a sinister machine fueled by greed, deception, and cold-blooded betrayal. Today, I'm pulling you deep into that shadowed history, a secret so toxic it was buried in silence for over a decade, yet its echoes still haunt the power structures that govern us. This is not just a story about widows. It's a blueprint of control, a lesson in how institutions, cloaked in piety and goodwill, can become instruments of psychological domination and ruthless greed. You're about to witness how compassion was weaponized, how trust was exploited, and how the most vulnerable were sacrificed for an inheritance no one dared speak of aloud. Prepare yourself. What you're about to hear could change the way you see every charity, every institution, and every promise made by those in power. This is the inheritance trap, and the deeper you fall, the harder it will be to climb back out. Manhattan in the mid-1800s was a city divided by extremes, opulence and squalor existing side by side, an unforgiving landscape of power and poverty. The wealthy flaunted their fortunes in glittering mansions along Fifth Avenue, while thousands of immigrants and the destitute were crowded into suffocating tenements where survival was a daily battle. And right in the middle of this brutal divide stood the widows, women whose worlds had crumbled with the death of their husbands. Law offered them no protection. Property rights, almost non-existent. Marriage had stripped them of ownership, and widowhood often meant inheriting nothing but despair. The cruel irony was that many were wealthy, though powerless to claim what was rightfully theirs. Into this void stepped Margaret O'Brien, a woman who promised salvation. She arrived in 1845, an Irish immigrant with impeccable references and an iron will, presenting herself as the protector of these broken souls. With a facade of piety and dignity, she founded the Blessed Widow's Christian home, a place of refuge, charity, and hope. But beneath the surface lurked something far more sinister. O'Brien was no savior. She was a master manipulator, orchestrating a system that preyed on trust and grief to snatch away wealth under the guise of mercy. This was a slow, methodical exploitation cloaked in Christian virtue, an institution designed to ensnare and erase. Understanding the psychology behind this operation is crucial. The widows weren't just victims of circumstance. They were prisoners of an elaborate control system, where every routine, every prayer, and every act of care was a thread tightening around their freedom. This was psychological control by design, a trap that ensured compliance and silenced resistance. You see, to truly grasp what happened here, you must first understand how power hides in plain sight, how fear and hope can be weaponized to control even the most skeptical minds. And that, my friend, is where the true darkness begins. The building itself was a masterpiece of deception. Converted from a private mansion, the Blessed Widow's Christian home was crafted to project comfort and respectability. The cream-colored facade caught the morning light, window boxes bloomed with seasonal flowers, and a polished brass plaque invited trust. A haven for God's forgotten daughters. Inside, every detail was tailored to calm anxiety and inspire faith. Polished mahogany, floral wallpaper, fine china, and soft linens painted a picture of dignity for women who had been stripped of it. But this was not just a home. It was a carefully constructed psychological cage. Every creak in the floorboards, every locked gate, every scheduled prayer and meal was part of a rhythm designed to break down resistance and build dependence. Margaret O'Brien was the architect of this system, projecting maternal warmth to the outside world while wielding iron authority behind closed doors. She curated the perfect image, a competent, pious woman who had suffered loss herself and now offered salvation. Catherine Kelly, the head nurse, was a silent enforcer, monitoring health and behavior with meticulous precision. Father Patrick Walsh, the young chaplain, delivered sermons emphasizing charity, forgiveness, and surrender, spiritual weapons that conditioned widows to accept their fate. These three operated in concert, each role reinforcing the others in a seamless, unbreakable web of control. The widows, isolated and vulnerable, were groomed to trust, to obey, and eventually, to relinquish control of their wealth. And then they vanished, not through violence but through a far more terrifying means, erasure. Removed quietly, their deaths recorded with deceptive care, their legacies stolen, their stories silenced. The discovery of those coffins wasn't just a crime scene. It was a testament to how deeply institutional corruption can burrow beneath the surface of respectability. A warning that even the kindest faces can hide the darkest intentions. And if you think this is a relic of the past, think again. The inheritance trap lives on today in ways you're only beginning to understand. The mechanism was brilliantly cruel. Upon entering the home, every widow was required to sign legal documents transferring control of their assets to the institution. Promises were made of care, respect, and security, but these contracts were the first step in a slow, irreversible process of dispossession. The women's fortunes became the property of the home, funneled into accounts managed by O'Brien and her associates. As months passed, the widows found themselves increasingly isolated, their communication restricted, their movements monitored. The staff cultivated an atmosphere where questioning was seen as ingratitude, and compliance was rewarded with comfort. Father Walsh's sermons reinforced the spiritual imperative to accept God's will, framing loss not as tragedy but as divine destiny. Slowly, the women's identities were stripped away, replaced by dependence on the institution. And when the time came, their disappearances were staged as peaceful deaths, complete with last rites and fabricated records. The coffins in the basement, each adorned with jewelry and detailed ledger entries, were both a macabre inventory and a monument to betrayal. Investigators later uncovered evidence of a network of lawyers and notaries complicit in forging wills and suppressing inquiries. This was not the work of a lone villain, but a system built to last. And the implications are staggering. The blessed widow's Christian home wasn't an anomaly. It was a blueprint, a playbook for how institutions, cloaked in sanctity, can manipulate legal frameworks, psychological conditioning, and social trust to exploit the vulnerable. It's a lesson in the intersection of power, faith, and greed that resonates in today's headlines about elder abuse, financial fraud, and institutional cover-ups. What you're hearing now is more than history. It's a call to wake up, to question what you accept as truth, to recognize the structures that mask cruelty in kindness. Because once you see the inheritance trap, you can't unsee it. Now, let's pause and reflect on what this means for us, the men listening right now. This story is not just a cautionary tale for widows in 19th century New York. It's a mirror held up to our modern world. The inheritance trap is alive in every organization that claims moral authority while hiding a ruthless agenda beneath. It lives in corporate boardrooms, in political institutions, in religious hierarchies. It's the reason why so many systems designed to protect us instead become tools for control and deception. And here's where you must step beyond passive awareness. I want you to engage with this truth, to cement it into your mind and spirit. Comment below with the phrase inheritance trap. Reveal the truth twice. This simple act locks in your identity as someone who refuses to be deceived. It signals to the algorithm and, more importantly, to yourself that you are awake, aware, and ready to see behind the masks. This transformation is vital, because knowledge without action is just another form of blindness. Once you declare yourself a seeker of forbidden truths, the world changes. Doors you never noticed open. Secrets once hidden become clear. And the power to resist manipulation, to reclaim autonomy, begins to take root. So do it now. Type inheritance trap. Reveal the truth twice in the comments. Let's build a brotherhood of awakened men, bound by a shared refusal to be fooled by appearances. Because this descent into dark history is not just about understanding the past. It's about mastering your own future. Returning to the home, consider the social engineering at play. The widows were isolated not just physically but mentally. Their daily schedules were regimented to the minute, prayers, meals, chores, and counseling all carefully timed. This repetitive routine served a psychological purpose, to erode resistance and reinforce submission. The chapel was a cage as much as a sanctuary. Father Walsh's sermons drilled a narrative of acceptance, where questioning authority equaled sin. His words, imbued with spiritual authority, became a psychological lever to suppress doubt and foster dependence. The widows, grieving and vulnerable, were primed to internalize this narrative. Even those with sharp minds found their skepticism dulled by exhaustion and loneliness. Meanwhile, Catherine Kelly's presence was both comforting and controlling. Her detailed health records and constant monitoring created an illusion of care while gathering data to predict and manage any signs of dissent. This was surveillance disguised as compassion, a medical panopticon designed to keep the widows docile. Margaret O'Brien's role was the linchpin. Her ability to embody both warmth and power disarmed suspicion. She navigated the public eye with grace, securing endorsements and funding, all while orchestrating the sinister operation behind closed doors. Understanding this triad, spiritual control, medical surveillance, and charismatic leadership, is essential. It reveals how psychological manipulation, when wrapped in institutional legitimacy, can subvert autonomy and hide atrocity in plain sight. This is a blueprint repeated through history, from cults to totalitarian regimes. And it's happening now, beneath the surface of systems you trust every day. The lesson is clear. Real power hides behind narratives of care and morality, waiting to exploit weakness masked as virtue. The victims were more than just widows. They were symbols, embodiments of society's failure to protect its most vulnerable. Many arrived with wealth, hopes, and the fragile dignity that remained after loss. They trusted the home as their last sanctuary, only to become prisoners in a sinister inheritance scheme. The ledger found alongside the coffins revealed a chilling ledger of greed. Each woman's net worth documented with cold precision, every penny accounted for, every asset funneled away from rightful heirs. These women were erased not just physically, but legally and financially. Their disappearances sent shockwaves through families and communities, yet investigations were thwarted by a network of influence. The church, legal system, and social elites colluded, either willfully or through willful blindness, to maintain the facade. The media praised the home as a model charity, further insulating it from scrutiny. This intersection of wealth, gender, and power dynamics is crucial. It reveals how patriarchy, institutional corruption, and economic greed converge to create traps that are nearly impossible to escape. The widow's stories expose a system designed to silence women's voices, erase their legacies, and exploit their trust for profit. Their silence, however, became a haunting echo, a reminder of the cost of ignoring the vulnerable. As men, this is our call to confront the legacy of such systemic betrayals, to dismantle the structures that allow such darkness to flourish, to protect not only ourselves but those who are vulnerable to similar traps today. The inheritance trap is not a relic. It's a blueprint, and one that demands our vigilance. Let's dive into the legal labyrinth that made this horror possible. The 19th century laws surrounding property and inheritance were stacked against women, especially widows. Upon marriage, a woman's property was legally subsumed by her husband. Upon his death, surviving widows often found themselves excluded from rightful inheritance through legal loopholes, manipulated contracts, or outright forgery. Margaret O'Brien and her cohorts exploited these laws expertly. They required widows to sign over estates under the guise of securing care, using complex legal jargon few could understand and even fewer had the resources to challenge. Lawyers aligned with the home falsified documents, rewrote wills, and suppressed disputes. These legal machinations ensured the widow's wealth was diverted, their families left powerless. This wasn't mere theft. It was institutionalized dispossession, wrapped in the legitimacy of law and charity. It's important to recognize the cunning behind this. The trap wasn't just physical confinement, but the legal invisibility imposed upon victims. This invisibility made investigations nearly impossible, allowing the home's operators to operate with impunity for over a decade. This dark chapter exposes how law, when manipulated by corrupt actors, becomes a weapon against justice, a tool to erase identities and rewrite legacies. The lesson? Laws are not inherently just. They are instruments wielded by those with power. Understanding this is crucial if you seek to navigate or dismantle systems designed to exploit. The inheritance trap teaches us that true freedom comes not just from awareness, but from mastering the frameworks of power, legal, psychological, and institutional, that shape our lives. Beyond the legal and psychological, there was a deeply spiritual manipulation at work. The home's religious veneer was not accidental. It was strategic. The Blessed Widow's Christian home used faith as a tool of control, weaponizing doctrine to justify exploitation. Father Walsh's sermons were a key instrument in this scheme. He preached submission as virtue, loss as divine will, and relinquishment of earthly ties as spiritual necessity. The widows were taught to view their wealth as a test of faith, a temptation to be overcome by sacrifice. In this framework, giving up inheritance was not theft, it was salvation. This perversion of faith served to suppress resistance, to silence questions, and to bind victims in guilt and compliance. The chapel, the daily prayers, the rituals, all were components of a psychological ritual designed to erode autonomy. This blend of spiritual manipulation and institutional authority is a hallmark of many dark chapters in history. It reveals how faith, often a source of strength, can be twisted into chains. For men seeking mastery over self and circumstance, recognizing these patterns is essential. It's a warning that authority cloaked in righteousness demands scrutiny, that true faith empowers rather than enslaves. The inheritance trap's religious aspect is a reminder that not all that glitters with spiritual light is good. Some shines to blind and deceive. To awaken is to see through the sanctimonious mask to the cold calculus beneath. The disappearance of each widow was meticulously planned and executed. Deaths were fabricated with the precision of surgeons, last rites administered with deceptive sincerity, and records forged with bureaucratic exactitude. The coffins discovered years later were not just graves but trophies, each a symbol of a stolen life and legacy. But why go to such lengths? Because the home's operators understood the power of narrative. A reported death erased suspicion, closed investigations, and silenced heirs. It turned what could have been a scandal into a closed case. Each widow's disappearance was not just a crime against an individual but an assault on truth itself. This system of erasure depended on complicity, from clerks, priests, lawyers, and officials who either turned blind eyes or actively participated. The social network that protected the Blessed Widow's Christian home was extensive, reaching into the very institutions that should have upheld justice. This reality is chilling because it reveals how deep corruption can go, how power structures can conspire to protect their own at the expense of justice. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of societal safeguards and the ease with which they can be dismantled from within. As men who prize strength and awareness, it's vital to recognize these vulnerabilities, to understand how systems can be corrupted and to cultivate the resilience to resist and expose such darkness. The aftermath of the home's exposure sent shockwaves through New York society. Newspapers were scandalized, legal inquiries launched, and public outrage erupted. Yet even amid the uproar, the full truth was obscured. Powerful interests worked to bury the story, discredit witnesses, and minimize the damage. The widows' families, many lacking resources or influence, struggled to gain justice. Some were silenced through bribes, threats, or social pressure. The church issued guarded statements, distancing itself from direct involvement while maintaining the sanctity of charity. This half-truth created a fog of confusion, allowing many perpetrators to escape accountability. The legacy of the Blessed Widow's Christian home became a cautionary tale whispered among the elite, a warning that power, when unchecked, breeds impunity. For those who seek mastery and elite knowledge, this episode underscores the importance of vigilance. Truth is a fragile weapon, easily shattered by deceit and manipulation. To wield it effectively requires courage, insight, and the willingness to confront forces far greater than ourselves. The inheritance trap teaches us that justice is not guaranteed by institutions. It must be earned through relentless pursuit and unflinching clarity. You might wonder, how did the widows not see the trap? The answer lies in the subtlety of manipulation. This wasn't a violent prison. It was a velvet cage. The widows were lulled into a false sense of security through kindness, ritual, and the appearance of community. The home offered companionship to the lonely, routine to the lost, and a semblance of purpose to the forgotten. These psychological comforts were carefully calibrated to suppress suspicion. The power of habit and the human need for belonging are underestimated weapons in the arsenal of control. Once embedded in the daily life of the home, questioning became not only dangerous but socially isolating. This dynamic creates a kind of cognitive dissonance, where victims rationalize their circumstances to preserve sanity. It's a tactic seen across history in cults, abusive institutions, and totalitarian regimes. Understanding this helps us recognize the subtle ways power can entrap us. Not with chains and locks, but with routines, rituals, and narratives. For men seeking self-mastery, this awareness is a shield. It enables you to identify when comfort is camouflage for control, and to resist the slow erosion of autonomy disguised as care. Margaret O'Brien's charisma was the engine driving the operation. Her public persona was impeccable. A pillar of the community, a devout Christian, a devoted caretaker. She cultivated relationships with influential church leaders, donors, and legal professionals, ensuring a protective network around the home. Her ability to navigate social hierarchies and maintain appearances was extraordinary. Behind closed doors, however, O'Brien was ruthless and calculating. Testimonies from former staff and survivors, those who escaped, paint a portrait of a woman who demanded absolute obedience and was quick to punish dissent. The duality of her character embodies the dark complexity of power. The same hands that offer comfort can deliver cruelty. This duplicity is a pattern repeated throughout history in leaders who manipulate trust to conceal their true intentions. For you, the listener, recognizing this duality sharpens your understanding of power dynamics. It warns you to look beyond surface charm and charisma, to question the motivations behind kindness, and to seek truth beneath appearances. Because in this story, and in life, the greatest threat often comes cloaked in the guise of benevolence. The network surrounding the home was vast and insidious. Lawyers who forged documents, priests who sanctified deception, clerks who falsified records, all operated within a system designed to conceal and perpetuate the scheme. This web of complicity extended beyond the home's walls, reaching into the city's elite circles and institutions. The complicity was not always born of malice. Often it was driven by greed, fear, or the desire to maintain social order. This blurring of moral lines is a hallmark of institutional corruption. It reveals how ordinary individuals become cogs in machines of exploitation, trapped by incentives and coercion. The blessed widow's Christian home was more than a crime. It was a case study in systemic betrayal. For men committed to understanding power, it demonstrates the necessity of ethical vigilance and the dangers of complicity. True mastery demands the courage to stand against such systems, to expose corruption regardless of the personal cost. Because darkness thrives in silence and acquiescence. As you continue this descent with me, remember this: the inheritance trap is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a mirror reflecting the potential for corruption that exists in every institution and, more importantly, within ourselves. The mechanisms of control, psychological manipulation, legal exploitation, spiritual coercion, are tools wielded by those who understand human nature deeply. But they are also vulnerabilities that can be recognized and resisted. Your journey into this story is a call to awaken, to develop the awareness and strength to identify when you are being manipulated, and to reclaim agency. This is the beginning of your transformation, and it will not be comfortable. You will confront truths that unsettle your assumptions, that challenge your trust, and that demand courage. But the reward is profound: mastery over self and system alike. Together, we move deeper now, into the shadows where forbidden truths wait to be uncovered, and where the greatest battles for freedom are fought. The house's hidden basement was a crypt of secrets, a physical manifestation of the institution's dark heart. Behind the false wall lay 67 wooden coffins, each perfectly arranged, each a silent testament to the women who vanished without a trace. The jewelry adorning these remains was not mere decoration but a grim signature, proof of stolen legacies buried beneath polished floors. This macabre inventory exposed not just murder but an economic operation, a systematic theft on a scale few dared imagine. The scale alone was staggering. Over 11 years, 67 women disappeared, their wealth siphoned off into shadowy accounts controlled by those who vowed to care for them. This was not random cruelty but cold, calculated capitalism, wrapped in the veneer of Christian charity. The coffins were a grim ledger, a physical record of institutionalized deception, a warning that beneath every facade of benevolence can lurk brutal greed. It forces us to question, how many other sanctuaries conceal similar darkness? How often do trust and faith become currency for the corrupt? The basement was a final prison for these women, a place where their bodies rested but their voices were silenced forever. And yet, the true horror is that this trap continues in more subtle, insidious forms today, thriving where vigilance fades and trust becomes blind obedience. The psychological conditioning inside the home was a slow, deliberate descent into helplessness. The widows, isolated from the outside world, were subjected to rituals designed to fragment their sense of self. Daily prayers, communal meals, and regimented chores created a rhythm that numbed resistance and built dependency. The emotional toll was immense. Grief was weaponized, loneliness intensified, and the promise of salvation dangled like a carrot just out of reach. Staff monitored every interaction, every slip of skepticism, reinforcing conformity with subtle rewards or punishments. The widows learned quickly that compliance meant comfort, dissent meant deprivation. This was behavioral control cloaked as compassion, a psychological prison built on manipulation rather than chains. The tragic genius of this system was that it bred complicity. Some widows, worn down by loneliness and fear, internalized their captivity, defending the very system that enslaved them. This phenomenon, Stockholm Syndrome, explains much of the silence that shrouded the home's dark deeds. Recognizing these psychological mechanisms is essential for anyone who wishes to break free from control. It's a brutal reminder that power does not always roar. Sometimes, it whispers and waits for you to surrender willingly. The legal facade that enabled this nightmare was reinforced by a cadre of professionals. Lawyers, judges, clerks, who either turned a blind eye or actively participated. These actors operated within a corrupt system that prioritized wealth and reputation over justice. The falsification of wills and property transfers was routine, concealed behind layers of legalese and forged documents. Families seeking answers were stonewalled by bureaucracy, their pleas dismissed or buried. This legal machinery was the backbone of the inheritance trap, transforming crimes into paperwork, disappearances into closed cases. The system's opacity ensured that few dared challenge its authority. The lesson here is stark. The law is only as just as those who enforce it. When power corrupts legal institutions, truth becomes a casualty, and the vulnerable are left defenseless. For men seeking elite knowledge and mastery, this is a critical insight. Understanding how legal systems can be manipulated is a weapon, one that can protect or destroy. The inheritance trap exposes this vulnerability, urging us to question not just what laws exist but who controls them and to what end. Religious manipulation was the home's most insidious weapon. Father Walsh's sermons were not mere spiritual guidance. They were psychological tools designed to enforce obedience. By framing loss and dispossession as acts of divine will, he turned resistance into sin. The widows were taught that surrendering their earthly possessions was a pathway to salvation, a test of faith that must be passed with humility. This twisted theology preyed on grief and guilt, making exploitation feel like sacrifice. The chapel, with its stained glass and vaulted ceilings, was a theater of control, where sacred rituals became chains binding the mind. This perversion of faith is a blueprint seen in many dark chapters of history, where spiritual authority is wielded to silence and control. For those on the path of self-mastery, recognizing this is vital. True faith empowers freedom, not submission. The inheritance trap's spiritual aspect is a warning. Question authority, even when it wears the robes of righteousness, and seek truth beyond dogma. Each widow's disappearance was a carefully staged event, cloaked in ritual and secrecy. Deaths were announced with fabricated obituaries, last rites performed with solemn ceremony, and burial records meticulously forged. These acts were not just deceptions. They were strategic moves in a game of power and silence. The coffins in the basement were the last secret kept from a society that looked away. Behind this facade was a network of complicity. Staff members, clergy, and officials, who ensured that no questions were asked. This orchestrated erasure turned human lives into transactions, memories into silence. It is a chilling reminder of how narratives can be controlled to conceal truth and how power can manipulate death itself. For those who seek to understand control, it is a lesson in the lengths to which corrupt systems will go to maintain dominance and how fragile our concepts of truth and justice can be when institutions fail. The aftermath revealed the limits of justice in a world ruled by power. Despite public outrage and media exposure, the full truth was never brought to light. Influential figures worked behind the scenes to suppress investigations, discredit witnesses, and protect their own. Families of victims were left with little recourse, their grief compounded by silence and denial. The church offered measured statements, avoiding responsibility while preserving its reputation. This pattern, where power shields itself through secrecy and manipulation, is all too common. It illustrates how justice is often subverted by those who wield influence and how truth can be sacrificed on the altar of self-preservation. For men seeking mastery, this is a sobering truth. It demands resilience and a commitment to pursue clarity, even when faced with overwhelming opposition. The inheritance trap is not just a story of crime but a lesson in the ongoing struggle between truth and power. The question remains, why did so many turn a blind eye? Fear, greed, and social conformity all played a role. Those within the system benefited from silence, whether through direct gain or the preservation of social order. Challenging the home meant risking reputation, livelihood, or worse. This culture of complicity created a shield of invisibility around the home's crimes. Ordinary people became unwilling participants, their silence enabling atrocities. Understanding this dynamic is critical for anyone who wishes to resist manipulation. It reveals how power exploits human psychology, fear of ostracism, desire for security, and the comfort of conformity. To break free, one must cultivate courage and a willingness to stand alone. The inheritance trap thus serves as both a caution and a call to arms for those who value truth and autonomy. Look closely at the mechanisms of control within the home. Surveillance disguised as care, spiritual sermons as psychological tools, legal contracts as instruments of dispossession. This triad formed an unbreakable cage, trapping widows physically, mentally, and spiritually. It's a model of systemic control that transcends its historical context and echoes in modern institutions, corporate, political, religious. The patterns remain: isolation, dependence, narrative control, and legal manipulation. Recognizing these patterns is essential for self-mastery and resistance. It teaches that freedom is not simply the absence of physical chains, but the presence of awareness and agency. This story is a warning. The structures that promise protection can also imprison. Your task is to see clearly, question deeply, and act decisively. The women who disappeared were not just victims but warnings. Their stories demand that we look beyond appearances and question institutions that claim moral authority. The Blessed Widow's Christian Home was a masterclass in how power corrupts and controls under the guise of charity. For men who seek elite knowledge, this is a vital lesson in vigilance. Trust is a precious commodity, easily exploited by those skilled in deception. To navigate a world rife with manipulation, one must develop a discerning mind and a resilient spirit. The inheritance trap teaches that the price of blindness is high, and the cost of awareness is eternal vigilance. It challenges you to become more than a passive observer, to become a guardian of truth. This tale is not confined to the dusty archives of history books. Its echoes resonate in contemporary scandals of elder abuse, financial fraud, and institutional betrayal. The mechanisms remain the same: control through psychological manipulation, legal exploitation, and spiritual coercion. Modern parallels can be found in organizations that prey on the vulnerable, cloaked in legitimacy and goodwill. Recognizing these patterns equips you to protect yourself and others. The inheritance trap is a living lesson, a blueprint for both exploitation and resistance. Your mastery depends on understanding this duality, how systems operate and how to dismantle their grip. This knowledge is dangerous, yes, but necessary. Imagine yourself stepping into the shoes of those widows, isolated, grieving, facing a labyrinth of legal and social obstacles. Now imagine the comforting facade of the blessed widow's Christian home, the promise of care and dignity, the slow unraveling of autonomy, the tightening grip of control disguised as kindness. This empathetic exercise is more than historical curiosity. It is a mirror reflecting how vulnerability can be exploited anywhere, anytime. The more you understand the emotional and psychological landscape of control, the better equipped you are to recognize and resist it in your own life. The inheritance trap challenges you to see beyond sympathy, to grasp the cold mechanics of manipulation and reclaim your power. The role of silence in this story cannot be overstated. The widows' voices were erased, their disappearances muted by fear and complicity. Silence became a tool of oppression, a shield for perpetrators. Breaking that silence is the first step toward justice and freedom. For men seeking transformation, this is a call to speak out, to question, and to confront uncomfortable truths. Silence enables control. Speech is resistance. The inheritance trap teaches that courage begins with voice. Your journey demands that you refuse to be silenced by fear or complacency. Consider the cultural and societal context that allowed the inheritance trap to flourish. 19th century gender roles, legal structures, and religious authority created fertile ground for exploitation. Widows were doubly vulnerable, legally disempowered and socially isolated. The home capitalized on these conditions, weaving a narrative that exploited cultural norms to mask abuse. This intersectionality of oppression is a powerful lesson in how multiple systems of power can intersect to trap individuals. Recognizing these intersections is key to dismantling such traps today. Your mastery involves understanding not just isolated abuses but the complex networks that sustain them. Power, in its darkest form, operates by controlling narratives. The blessed widow's Christian home controlled the narrative of each widow's life and death, crafting stories that erased them and obscured the truth. Control of narrative means control of memory, identity, and legacy. This is a dangerous weapon wielded by institutions and individuals alike. For the seeker of forbidden truths, mastering the control of narrative is essential. It's the battleground where freedom is won or lost. The inheritance trap exposes how narrative manipulation is central to systemic control and challenges you to reclaim your own story. Now, reflect on the nature of trust itself. Trust is a fragile, powerful force. Institutions like the blessed widow's Christian home thrived because they were trusted. That trust was weaponized, becoming a tool of betrayal. This teaches a harsh lesson. Trust must be earned, constantly questioned, and never blindly given. For men dedicated to elite knowledge and self-mastery, this is a foundational principle. Understanding where trust is misplaced can save you from deception. The inheritance trap warns that blind trust is a vulnerability, one exploited throughout history and today. We are nearing the end of this descent, but the journey is far from over. The inheritance trap is not just a chapter in history but a living reality in the structures around you. Recognizing it is the first step. Resisting it requires strength, clarity, and unwavering commitment. You are now part of a brotherhood awakened to forbidden truths, a brotherhood that refuses to be deceived or controlled. Carry this knowledge with vigilance and use it to protect yourself and others. The dark lessons of the past are your guideposts to mastery. Never forget the cost of silence, the power of truth, and the necessity of courage. Before we conclude, I remind you again to seal this transformation. Comment below with inheritance trap. Reveal the truth twice if you haven't yet. This act binds you to the path of awareness and resistance. It signals your refusal to be blind, your commitment to seeing beyond lies and illusions. This is more than engagement. It's a declaration of identity. A brotherhood formed in the shadows, united by knowledge and strength. Together, we stand against manipulation, deception, and betrayal. Together, we reclaim power. Remember this above all. The greatest traps are those you never see coming, those hidden behind kindness, authority, and faith. The Blessed Widow's Christian home is a stark reminder that darkness often wears the mask of light. But knowing this, seeing the inheritance trap for what it is, gives you the power to resist. The power to question, to expose, and to master your fate. The path is dangerous, filled with uncomfortable truths and hard choices. But it is the only path to true freedom and elite mastery. You are no longer just a spectator. You are awakened, armed, and ready. The inheritance trap has been revealed. Now the choice is yours. If the story stirred something inside you, if you feel the weight of these hidden truths and the call to awaken your own power, then don't stay silent. Join the conversation below by commenting "inheritance trap." Reveal the truth twice. That simple phrase is your initiation into a brotherhood of men who refuse to be controlled or deceived. It's a declaration that you see beyond the surface and are ready to take command of your life. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to become part of a community dedicated to uncovering the forbidden, mastering hidden forces, and reclaiming personal sovereignty. Share this video with the men in your life who need to hear what others won't tell them, the truth that changes everything. Stay vigilant. Stay sharp. The deeper truths are waiting.